Good morning. It looks like we are live right now. good morning, and good morning. Let's go ahead and open up in prayer this morning. Our Father, who art in heaven, how holy is your name. Your kingdom will come, and your will shall be done here on this earth as it is in heaven. Lord, give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us of our sins as we forgive those who have sinned against us. Lead us not into temptation, and deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom and the power and the glory forever. And everybody says, Amen. Good morning, everybody. Now, we're going to jump right into it. We have a very interesting concept and idea this morning given to us from the New Testament of the Bible. This is going to help explain a lot as far as the physical aspects of narcissism, of evil, of how we are corruptible as human beings, how we can fall into the traps of disobedience, how we can fall into the traps of influence. And for those of you who are subscribed to the Organic Royal We channel, you will know that I just put out a organic video talking about the false narratives that we are given throughout our life, even through large companies and entities like Disney, for example. And the idea was the cartoon Beauty and the Beast. The girl falls in love with the monster of a person, and is somehow able to subdue the monster and transform him into a perfect Prince Charming. The idea and everything that we're talking about in this is this notion that we are very corruptible, we are very influential as people, and we're going to see this in today's Bible study. I'm going to redo last week's Bible study, and last week we talked about Genesis 6. This was when the earth was basically so corrupted. It sets the stage for why the flood was going to begin. And now, in last week's study, we talked about more of the moral principles of what was so corrupted, and how the sons of God represent good people who uh, were taking wives, and then they became puffed up in their pride to create monsters, or to create, this puffed up image of themselves. And that is what is corruptible. And that is one way of looking at the story of what caused humanity to become so corrupted and so violent that in the ancient story God had to flood the world. But there's another way of looking at this too. It's a bit more mystical. For a lot of people, it comes across as heresy, even. But there's a lot of scriptures, and there's a lot of resources to help build the case that there's something to this, if not, for nothing else, just principles for you and I to understand on how we are the way that we are, and how we must be on our guard. We must be extra careful, and we must be committed in ourselves for truth and in every relationship, and we must be aware of the things that are happening. So let's go back. We're going to relook, as I said, the beginning of Genesis. Okay. It's going to sound like last week's message, but I promise you it's going to be a lot more interesting. That's for sure. Genesis 6:1 says, "Now when men began to multiply on the face of the earth, and daughters were born to them, the sons of God saw that the daughters of men were beautiful, and they took for themselves wives of whomever they chose." Now, obviously, this comes after we read about Adam and Eve, about Cain and Abel. We saw that Cain killed his brother Abel. Time had decades and had gone by, and now we're at this place where there are the sons of God and there are the daughters of men. Now, what's interesting here is that when we talk about the sons of God, a lot of people have said that there's two different ways of looking at this. There's the mysticism side, which means that the sons of God were angelic beings. They were, some people refer to them as the Watchers. They are a part of they're angels. They're not human. But there's a lot of people that dismiss that. No, 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 that's impossible. The sons of God are referring to the sons of Seth. Who were Seth? Seth was the brother of Cain that was meant to replace Abel after Cain killed Abel. And so there's two different ways, the sons of Seth versus the daughters of men. However, I would argue, and there's a lot of argument, that that may not be the case. Sons of God, first of all, we see that there's only one begotten Son that God had on earth, and that's Jesus. It's written in John 3:16 in the New Testament, uh, that Jesus was his one and only begotten Son. So when we talk about the sons of God, it'd be safe to say that God did not have sons in a way on the earth. He had his created beings. He had man. He had humanity. And so when we look at sons, there's a clear distinction between the word sons of God used in this text and the daughters of men, right? He makes that distinction. Mankind, sons of God. And so for a lot of people that says makes them say, that's different. Why would they be referred to as sons of God? So now we get into the idea of angels and watchers. And now it's not that far fetched that there would be angels and watchers in and around and able to witness mankind. After all, we've already read that in the Garden of Eden, Eve and Adam both had an interaction with the serpent, with an entity that was in the garden prior to Adam and Eve that was able to communicate with them and that was also able to impose a challenge to them, evil to them, and corruption to them, right? Challenged God's authority. So it's safe to say that there are entities that we are unaware of, according to the ancient texts, that are able to interact with mankind. And so we see here that there were the sons of God, and they were witnessing and watching and around. And for all we know, these sons of God were there since the beginning, even in the Garden of Eden. The other name for them is watchers. So for all we know, they were watching what transpired between the serpent and Adam and Eve. They were watching how influential humanity can be, how easy it is to create memories, to create thoughts in the minds that are built of flesh. I want you to imagine, if you would, that we are very mechanical in a way. Yes, we are born of the dust of this earth, but the water in our bodies, the electricity in our bodies, the neurons and the pathways, in a way, we're very electronic. So we have what God created initially, which is the soul, the mind, and the heart. But as far as the flesh is concerned, what's outside of it, this ship, this vessel that we are in temporarily, is very even electronic. There's electricity, right, within us. How many of you are aware of that, right? And so, as the watchers and even as the serpent understood, it can be very manipulated. It can be very programmable, if you will. And how many of you are aware that, yes, we can be programmable? Why do you think there is television? Why do you think there is movies? Why do you think there are stories? Why do you think there's a public education system if it were not to be able to condition and to program people? How many of you am I hitting right now with a little bit of nervousness with this concept, with this principle? It's an interesting one. Now, being that we are programmable, the watchers, the angels, according to some of the ancient story, right? The watchers were the sons of God. And in Genesis 6, it says that 6:1, they saw the daughters of men were beautiful and they took for themselves wives. Now, there's an extra biblical source that gives us more detail about this. It's not a canon book of the Bible, but it's the Book of Enoch. I talked about Enoch briefly in last week's message. Enoch was somebody who is one of the two who walked with God and then was taken up in their physical form. They were no more. It says they walked with God and they were no more. So it's safe to say that Enoch was a very special character, being, throughout the ancient text, because of the fact that he was just taken up with God. So lo and behold, there is a book of Enoch, and also the book of Enoch was referenced in the book of Jude later in the New Testament. This is at the time or after Jesus. So there is an understanding that there are writings from Enoch that exist. What's real writings of Enoch and versus what's mystical and fabricated, we don't know. But if you look resources that are available today, you will have lots of options for writings from Enoch. He goes into greater detail for us in his writings, more about the mystical side and a little bit of the scarier side of understanding who we are, who the angels are, how manipulatable, if that is such a word, we can be. How easily it is for us to be misled and for us to be, uh, well, we're going to find out here. So Enoch tells us this, that the watchers, the angels, and it follows Genesis 6 here, right after. So you can almost, and I'm going to fill in the gaps here with Genesis 6. So Genesis 6 says the sons of God saw the daughters of men were beautiful, and they took wives from whoever they chose. Enoch continues on, the book of Enoch, and they took wives, and everyone chose for himself one each. And they began to go into them and were promiscuous. So the watchers, the angels, were promiscuous with them. Doesn't stop there. And it taught them, and they, being the watchers, and first of all, earlier in the story, it says that the watchers made an agreement on a particular mountain on the earth, Mount Hermon, which is a real mountain. And according to the ancient story, these angels and watchers came together and made agreement that they were going to go against God to do this thing. They knew it was wrong, what they were about to embark on. They saw the daughters of men were beautiful. They also, I believe, witnessed the serpent in the garden, or the devil, being able to manipulate Eve. And so they thought amongst themselves, wow, we could go down there and we could have our way with God's creation. And I don't believe it was because they were falling in love as we fall in love with physical pleasure, because angels, watchers they're not dependent on that physical form. I believe it was more of a, uh, how would you say, a going against. It was more of a rebellion. It was more of a look at what God had made, yet we can have the power to manipulate that. Let's test this out. I believe it was more of that. Less love, more of, can we manipulate God's, work. And so it says that they took for wives for each for themselves. They began to go into them, were promiscuous with them, again experimenting with all kinds of things with them. They taught them charms and spells. This is very interesting. They taught them charms and spells. So charms and spells and things of this nature are things that are out of this world, according to Enoch. It's things that are in the angelic realm. And how many of you know that there are charms, that there are spells, there's these irresistible pulls that people can learn and be able to manage over other people. And it's almost as if it's just a weird pull. Being seduced, for example. Well, what is it exactly? How is it that even a not so very good looking person can seduce somebody who is, right? There's this certain power. So we're seeing right here that what the ancient writers are telling us is that these are charms and spells that were taught by a rebellious entity, the Watchers, who had fallen. And so they taught them charms and spells. They showed them the cutting of roots and trees. And the women of mankind became pregnant and bore large giants. The height was 3 cubits. Now, we're going to get into, there's before we get into the giants, okay, and back into Genesis, we're going to continue on here. There was actually names for some of these watchers, Azazel, and it's important to understand this part, what I'm gonna share with you as well. So while they were mingling with humanity, and again, we've already established it is not impossible for the entities of God, angels, serpents, to mingle with humanity, because after all, we believe that it happened in the Garden of Eden, right, with the serpent and Adam and Eve. So why is it impossible to understand that these angels, these watchers, were mingling with humanity after the Garden of Eden? Azazel taught men to make swords and daggers and shields and breastplates. Azazel, by the way, is a apparent name of one of the watchers. So Azazel taught them to make swords and daggers and shields and breastplates. This is in Enoch chapter 8. And he showed them the things after these, and the art of making them, bracelets, ornament, the art of making up the eyes, makeup, of beautifying the eyelids. So this male angel, Azazel, well, I guess they're not real sexual. If they're angels, they're of a different kind altogether. However, taught the beauty of eyelids. Okay, The most important precious stones. They showed humans the precious stones, precious, the rarities, the things, again, of God that were sprinkled in and around the earth. All kinds of colored dyes. And the world was changed with these things. Wow. And there was great impiety and much fornication, and they went astray, and all their ways became corrupt. Amazarach taught all those who cast spells and cut roots. Amoros, the release of spells, and Baraquil, astrologers. Astrology was not something that humanity was created to be a part of. But again, it's indicating to us, the ancient texts are, that these fallen angels really seduced mankind into understanding all these things, uh, learning about these things, and all about these things. And this is going to be very impactful for you and I. So they taught how to cast spells, taught astrology, the path of the moon, and in the destruction of men they cried out, and their voices reached heaven. So what you see here is this image of these watchers, these angels, teaching humanity about sensuality. Not only about that, but about warfare, about how to fight. The watchers, the angels, created and showed men how to create daggers. They also created women how to wear makeup, to do their eyes, and to be in touch with this really peculiar sensuality. So it was all conditioning, if you will, according to the ancient text, by these fallen entities, by these watchers, by the sons of God, right? According to the book of Enoch. All right. Now, it's in this time that the Lord said, "My spirit will not contend with man forever, for he is mortal. His days shall be in 120 years." This is in Genesis. So now we're back in Genesis, and we can read it kind of in line here. So God is looking at all of this, saying, "My spirit will not contend." This is Genesis 6, verse 3. Will not contend with men forever. That word contend means will not plead, will not thrive, will not be able to cry out to men forever. And I believe I have an understanding as to why this statement is being said. He's saying, "For he is mortal; his days will be 120 years." Another way of what to look at what God is saying in this is that as this is unfolding, and the watchers and the fallen angels are intermingling with his creation, what he's really saying is that my spirit cannot contend with men forever, for he is mortal, meaning the flesh in a peculiar way. The mechanics of it is very corruptible. It's very corruptible. He's able to see how easily influenced the brain is in creating memories, in storing. Since we are made to store memories, we are created to be able to store ideas, we're able to store thoughts, and we're able to work from these things in these vessels, in these bodies. That's called mortal. That's mortal flesh. That's all a part of mortality. And what God is saying is this is extremely corruptible. I can see he's able to witness how fallen angels, how watchers, or how sons of God even can commit these things and get people to get off of the track of life, off of the path of life, and give to them messages and ideas and thoughts. Teach people ways of killing, teach people the ways of seduction, teach people the ways of just looking beautiful, which is a part of in a way of seduction. So God is saying, this mortality, I can't contend with this unless I wipe everybody out, because that's a part of the flesh. That's a part of having the brain. So we need to understand, you and I, that being in the flesh, we are in a very corruptible state. How many of you would agree? We are very easily influenced, and we still are to this day. The things that we're reading that were written in the ancient texts, these things were written thousands of years ago, where people are learning from angels how to make weapons and how to become beautiful. We are still intrigued by this today. How many of you watch or have watched YouTube videos on how to do your makeup and look beautiful? There are YouTube videos right now of people teaching other people how to become pickup artists, and there's women teaching guys how to be pickup artists, and you can watch them. You can go on YouTube and hey, I'll give you the secrets and the tips to get that girl into your bed on the first date. Right? This is the world we still live in. And it's saying that this is exactly what was taking place because of the corruptibility of our minds, how easily we are to be conditioned. And so, yes, we are still living in a day of narcissism where we see spells being cast, where we see things being taught to us on sensuality, on fighting, on weapons. Nothing essentially has changed since the Book of Enoch was written thousands of years ago, and since the Book of Genesis was written thousands of years ago. Now I'm going to continue on. So again, just to get clear in our understanding of how easy it is for humanity to be corrupted, remember Adam and Eve were also corrupted by the entity in the garden. It's called a serpent, but we're going to call it an entity, because how many of you have come across a literal serpent that's able to talk and rationalize and reason and challenge? Not many of us. So it's an entity that they refer to as a serpent. Now then, they were influenced by the serpent to make their decisions. Not only were they influenced, Eve straight up turned away from what Adam told her to do and was so intrigued by the serpent. I would venture to say that that was most likely the very first affair ever documented. When a woman is caught off guard by this corruptible entity that pulls on the emotional, mental strings of that woman and gets her to go against the husband, I believe that what we see with Eve and Adam is an indication of the very first affair, as Eve was charmed and seduced into doing something that her husband told her not to do. The very first affair. And again, the watchers, if you will, were most likely a witness to this and to the corruptibility of humanity and of the flesh. Goes on to say in Genesis 6 now, we're back into Genesis, the Nephilim were on the earth in those days and afterward as well. This is important to understand, afterward as well. So the Nephilim, who were the Nephilim? Nephal means to fall. Nephal in the ancient Hebrew text means to fall, fell down, fell. Nephal can also mean to lie, to abandon, deserters, and defected. So Nephilim are the names given to these giants that were born of the watchers and of the women. Crossbreeds, if you will, of the fallen, of the liars, of the abandoners. Who did they abandon? They abandoned their rightful place of being watchers of God. They abandoned their true state of being of a certain order of creation. God had created the watchers to watch over humanity, not to intermingle with them, right? God had created them outside of humanity, yet they deserted their ranks to come and to intermingle and to pervert humanity. And so as a result, they had the children were born according to Genesis 6, and they were called Nephilim. They were giants. They were monstrosities. And they were in the earth in those days and after, when the sons of God had relations with the daughters of men, and they bore them children. The children became the mighty men of old, men of renown. Genesis 6, verse 5 says, the Lord God saw the wickedness of man was great upon the earth, and that every indication of the thoughts of his heart was altogether evil all the time. So keep in mind of what was taking place. Why was it evil? Well, again, we had the teaching and the influence of beauty, of makeup, of weapons, of charms, of spells, in addition to the perverse sexuality that was taking place and the giants that were being born. So again, this is in the mystery side of what had taken place, what had caused so much corruption. Now, we're going to go back into the book of Enoch. It's going to address a little bit more about the fallen state of the evil, the wickedness that was taking place. In Enoch chapter 7, it says, these, talking about the Nephilim, the giants that were born, these devoured. Oh, and first of all, Nephilim, when we talk about giants, a lot of us people would have a hard time with literal giants, but in fact, there were historically and in the ancient days, literal giants, Nephilim. They're also known as the sons of Anak. For many of you know the story of David and Goliath. Goliath was a giant. Goliath was Nephilim. So Nephilim were real, and it's since we have no other explanation as to where giants had derived from, there's no reason for us to not necessarily believe that it is a part of this debacle that the Watchers had come into. The daughters of men had children, and they were Nephilim. I would also like to add to it that, we watch movies and there's a lot of science fiction that includes giants. One of the ideas that I want to impress upon you in this is that, again, understanding the corruptibility of the imagination, of the mind, of people, of the flesh, these people and these writers and these creators, I highly doubt they pull these ideas out of nowhere, right? They just, well, I'm just going to think of a giant and write a story of a giant. I'm going to think of a story about superhumans with superhuman strength that can fly and this and that. I'm going to write a story about dragons. And I doubt they just pull this out of their rear ends. I'm under the impression that most of us, we only know what we know because this is how God has designed our minds. We go and we gather and we learn things and we see things, we witness things and we read things. And I believe that the stories of all the superhumans and even a lot of the Marvel universe characters and the DC universe characters with the Superman, there's a reason that they are referred to in some aspects as gods, right? And you have all the Greek gods. And I believe that a lot of these stories originated from stories that are from stories that are from stories that begin with some significant amount of truth. It was witnessed. There was a witness of giants. There was a witness of superhuman abilities. There was a witness of weird types of charms and mystical things as a result of, in the ancient days, the fallen angels, right? These stories were passed down, and here we are today. Now, Genesis 6, the Lord regretted. Oh, I'm sorry, I wanted to read Enoch to you, 7. So they devoured, talking about the giants now at that time. This is right around the time of the flood. The giants devoured all the toil of men until men were unable to sustain them. And the giants turned against them, against the men, in order to devour men. And they began to sin. And what is sin? Sin is a perversion of truth. They begin to sin against the birds, against the animals, against the reptiles, against the fish. And they devoured one another's flesh and drank the blood from it. And the earth complained of the lawless ones. So where we're given in the Bible, Genesis 6, saying that the Lord God saw the wickedness was great upon the earth, and that every inclination of the thoughts of the heart was evil continually. There's a lot left there, a lot of mystery. Well, what was so bad about the earth? Well, we're seeing a little bit about it in this outside source called Enoch. What are some of the things that are happening? The giants have devoured everything of humanity, of mankind. They turned against humanity, were eating humanity. But now watch this. The Watchers and the fallen angels in the story, according to Enoch, had already taught mankind how to make weapons, swords. So you can imagine there was probably a lot of wars. There was a lot of killing, a lot of bloodshed between Nephilim, giants, and between humanity. Not only that, but we see the giants turned against and perverted the truth against birds, against animals. Now, the interesting concept here in Enoch is that it doesn't say that the giants killed birds and killed animals and killed the reptiles and fish, and drank their blood. It says that they began to sin against the birds and the reptiles. So what does this mean exactly? Well, sin is to pervert the truth. So I don't believe that's as simple as just killing animals. I believe that the Nephilim, these corrupted beings that were half angelic, half humanity, because of their parents, angelic beings, watchers, I believe that they also were greatly into the manipulation of God's creation. So to sin against a bird, what would that look like? To pervert its truth. That would look like taking it from its original state, the truth of the bird, and trying to manipulate it to create something different. How would they do this? Possibly some kind of sexual activity, who knows? Some kind of ritualistic activity, but they wanted to pervert the truth of birds. They wanted to pervert the truth of animals, of reptiles, of fishes, right? So they were manipulating God's pure designs. And again, this goes in line with the idea of wanting to rebel against God's design. Again, when the same thing we saw the serpent do with Eve and Adam, uh, and what we see is that God created these beings, humanity, with flesh that was discovered to be corruptible, with brains that take in memories, and now there seems to be this fight between angelic beings to corrupt that, to say, wow, it's something we can toy with. It's something that we can manipulate if we turn our backs on God and do this. And this is what happened. And so now we have the killing. Now we have the perverting of animals, even. These Nephilim trying to pervert the truth of animals and change their makeup, change their genetics, change their identity. So whatever that looks like, I imagine was really grotesque, whatever was taking place against all the animals, against all the birds, and against all the fish. And they devoured each other. So at some point, the Nephilim even turned on each other, devoured each other's flesh. They became, uh, uh, what's that? What's the term I'm looking for when you eat other people's flesh? Not carnivorous, but there's a term for it, right? So it's an actual real thing, but they were eating one another, literally. This is how perverse, and I'm sure they taught mankind how to do this as well. So this is all an effort to say that of what it could possibly have looked like. And again, we're on the mystical side, and we're using external biblical sources, non-canon, the Book of Enoch, to help understand and fill in these gaps of what possibly was taking place. All of this to add up to the evilness that God saw, the wickedness that God saw upon his creation that was supposed to be a beautiful garden that had purity, men and women and animals, two of each kind. We see that, and we're going to see how actually, if we go back in earlier in Genesis, we see that God was very specific in how he made animals, two by two. He made two of each kind. God is really big on keeping kinds separated. What we see here is the opposite. We see the fallen angels. We see the Nephilim working to dismiss anything being of its own kind and instead intermingle, interbreed in perverse ways, sin and change and morph things. And that's what we're seeing here. So it says here next in Genesis 6, let's go back to Genesis 6 now. It says, and the Lord regretted that he made mankind on the earth, and he grieved him for his heart. So the Lord said, I will blot out man whom I have created from the face of the earth, every man and beast and crawling creature and bird of the air, for I am grieved that I have made them. Now, how many of you have ever wondered, reading that verse in Genesis 6, why would God be sorry that he made mankind? Why would he grieve that he made man? It almost makes it sound like like it's man's fault and that he's angry with man. And I don't believe that at all. I believe that what the Lord is regretting here in this, he's saying, it says the Lord regretted that he had made man on the earth, and it grieved him in the heart, is that he grieved the reality of what had unfolded, being corruptible flesh, a corruptible mind that was influenced and conditioned by fallen entities. This is what grieved him. This is what grieved him, was was looking and seeing how corruptible the flesh could be, how corruptible the brain of humanity can be, how easily it was for all these things to be manipulated. That is what grieved him. And rather than watch the bloodshed, and rather than watch the continuation of the fallen and of the Nephilim perverting all the animals and having their way and eating each other's flesh, which was just spreading over the entire earth, by the way, this is when God said, I will blot out all of man, all of humanity. In other words, he's saying, I will blot out all of corruptible flesh, all of the corruptible brains that can take in all this conditioning. I'm going to blot it out because it's so violent and becoming so perverted. And so this is where we're at. And now we're going to get into another aspect. Now, it's important to understand all of this, okay? Now, notice also that we already touched on it, said that there was Nephilim in those days and after the flood. It let us know this. There were giants before and after the flood. So, did God, in fact, blot everything out? Not necessarily. This is what we're going to get into. Genesis 6, verse 8. Noah, however, during this time, found favor in the eyes of the Lord. Now, this is the account of Noah. Noah was a righteous man, blameless in his generation. Noah walked with God. And Noah had 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Now, it's important to understand a lot of people would wonder, maybe you've heard the Bible school story of Noah being chosen by God to build the ark, okay? Because it says here that Noah found favor in the eyes of God. Why did Noah find favor? The answer is given to us right here, and this also is an answer that helps build the case that there was genetic issues because of manipulation that was taking place. It says here, Noah found favor in the eyes of God. This is the account of Noah. He was a righteous man, blameless in his generation. Now, I'm not going to spell out all the names in this message, but I did the research in the past to understand and identify that Noah has a direct line from him in his genealogy that goes back to Seth, to Adam and Eve. It's a pure line. As a matter of fact, the Bible, up to the point of Noah, if you read it, it goes through names right before we get to this point in Genesis 6. I believe it's Genesis 5. Goes through the names of the descendants of Seth, on and on and on through Enoch, right? And then to Noah. So Noah's genealogy was pure. Why did it make this? Why is this a factor? Because it's safe to say that in this time where the watchers or the angels or the corruption of humanity, there were a lot of half-breeds. The Nephilim were half-breeds. There's a lot of manipulation of the DNA that had been taking place. Noah was untouched. It was blameless in his generation, right? It was not manipulated yet. Noah was not half Nephilim. Noah was not part angel or watcher. Noah was 100%, if you follow the names, 100% pure humanity, the way God intended humanity to be. Again, God is big on creating things of their own kind. So Noah was a direct line from Adam and Eve and Seth all the way down to Noah. You can follow that line if you choose to, but it's a long line of names, so I'm not going to get into it right now. So that's the reason that God had chosen Noah, was because of the purity in his genealogy. And it says that Noah walked with God. Noah had 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Now, when entering the ark, right, and this is what God said, and this is important. God said this to Noah, I will establish my covenant with you, and you will enter the ark, you and your sons and your wife and your son's wife with you. Now, this is important. We know that Noah is a straight line. We know that Noah is pure in his genealogy, but we don't know very much about the wives, nor the sons' wives. Now, it's possible to make the assertion that the wives were possibly tainted, if you will, by the Nephilim, the crossbreeding. So they were not pure. And so they became the wives. And from this, they went into the ark. And the Lord said to Noah, go into the ark in Genesis, you and all your family, because I found you righteous in this generation. Take with you 7 of every kind of clean animal. There's another identifying fact. Clean animal, which means that they were unclean animals at that time. Again, referring to the possibility that there were mutations. There were perverted versions of the animals that God had created. Why? Because of the watchers, the Nephilim, the manipulation and the perversion of what God had designed. Okay? Take with you every clean animal. And I believe that God provided the clean animals to the ark. How many of you saw the movie about Noah's ark? God provided the animals. In other words, caused the animals to walk into the ark to make sure that they were clean. God spoke to the clean animals, the pure ones. 7 pairs of every kind of birds, and on and on and on. Now, With this and said, oh, it also says this, by the way. Um, 7 pairs of every kind of animals, male and female, preserving the offspring from the face of the earth. It also says that they were to bring unclean animals as well. And I believe God provided those. And in a correlation, I believe also God allowed the wives of Ham, of Shem, Ham, and Japheth to also be unclean. Why would God allow this? Well, we're going to probably get into this later, but the reality is that when it says that there was Nephilim in the on the earth before the flood and after, it means that that crossbreeding, that DNA, if you will, was allowed to continue on. That DNA was allowed after the flood. That's why it says there was Nephilim even after the flood. Nothing survived the flood, by the way, except what was allowed on that ship. Nothing. It says the earth and everything on top of it was destroyed except for what was in the ark, literally. So there was no Nephilim left on the face of the planet. However, there's the DNA of the possibility of the DNA of this crossbreeding within the wives of Noah, within the wives of his sons. And this crossbreeding now, once again, intermingling with the sons of Noah after the flood, continued that. And this would be an explanation as to why we face evil, why we face entities, why we face still to this day charms and spells and the arts of seduction and perverse nature. How many of you would say that this world has so much perverseness in it? It's almost as if there's an attempt by entities to perverse the truth, to disrupt what is good and what is moral. Now, I'm going to venture to go a bit deeper with you in this and to say this might turn a lot of you off, but I believe that in a way, all of us and all of our flesh has a bit, because of the length of time and the generations, has a bit of this corruption in it. I believe that each and every one of us has that slight bit of Nephilim DNA, as it will, as it's spread. And I believe that also this is why it's talked about in the New Testament of the Bible, how the flesh, even Paul says, we are at war with our flesh. The DNA, the perversion of our flesh, which is not its natural form or state, but a result of whatever took place in Genesis 6. And this is still rampant today. So for those of you who wonder why narcissism is so great, why people can kill and murder and not care, the idea and the concept is that it's a result of the perversion of the brain, of the body. And that's what I have today. I know this is hot and this is heavy, and it's important for you to understand, right, what we are at war with, even within ourselves. How many of you would say it's a daily battle not to be sidetracked by perverse things in life? How many of you would say it's a daily battle to not want to gain insights and not to be susceptible to certain charms on the earth? It is very difficult for us because it is possibly intertwined in all of our flesh. The difference is those of us who are awakened to it and know it and choose to battle every day, even against our own flesh, with this understanding. This was a long message. It's a very difficult message. I understand that. But I'm glad that you are here and we're able to open our eyes to some concepts and understanding of narcissism, of evil. And I invite you to join me next week right here on Royal We Fellowship as we continue on our journey and looking at the reality of the world for how it is. Thank you. Thank you for being here. We'll see you next week right here, 9 o'clock a.m. Central Standard Time, right here on Royal We Fellowship. Have a blessed weekend, everybody.